Make a list. How a simple practice can change our lives and open our hearts. Written by Marilyn McEntyre. Narrated by Ann Richardson. For the people who keep me on their prayer list and their contact list. For the people who distract me from the to-do list and the people who help me get through it. And for all the people on my A list whose names are inscribed in my heart. The whole long list of you. You know who you are. Introduction. Living by lists. I list a lot, and I'm not alone. In the course of many kitchen table conversations, I've discovered that we keep lists for a variety of reasons. People make lists to get organized, to plan the day, to set priorities, to clarify pros and cons as they make decisions, to explore their feelings, to dispel mental fog, to articulate goals, to identify their deepest hopes and purposes. What I've also discovered about lists is that every time I make one, I learn something. Things come up. Sometimes it seems that the less I plan or try to foresee what might belong on a list, the more I find out. So I just start in. Things to do before the weekend. Possible blog topics, people to get back to, nagging anxieties, things I'm grateful for. Even if the heading seems rather ho-hum, things to do, or borders on cliché, things to be grateful for, the process brings surprises. If I stay with it long enough to get beyond the obvious, buy the groceries, return the phone call, check email, get the oil changed, something not so obvious occurs, and the list shifts from list to something more. Take a walk by the river with no phone. Pick up protein bars to keep in the car for homeless people. Write to a grandchild about his science project. And I discover not only what I think I need to do, but what I want to do, what I've avoided doing, and what I don't do because I don't really want to. This is important information. In the process of making a list, I generally find that I can, as a therapist used to advise, go to the place in me that knows. Line by line, I can take myself there. It's a place of deep, lively, sometimes amusing, sometimes daunting encounter with the self, and often encounter with the indwelling spirit who is more present, available, reliable, and forgiving than we may think. When you make a list, if you stay with it and take it slowly, take it seriously but playfully, give yourself plenty of permission to put down whatever comes up, you begin to clarify your values, your concerns, the direction your life is taking, your relationship to your inner voice, your humor, your secrets. You discover the larger things that lists can reveal. Lists are mirrors. When you look at what you've written down, no matter what the content, a list shows you something about what has come to matter to you. Even if a phrase or a line occurs to you because you like the way it sounds, because it's funny, or because of what seems a random, interruptive thought, it's worth paying attention to. Listing, because it takes away a certain pressure to make sense, allows space for all associations. And whatever shows up, as in dreams, probably matters. Lists are a way of learning. E.M. Forster's famous question, "How can I know what I think until I see what I say?" remains an encouragement for writers to write and provides a lively incentive to undertake even the humble task of making a list. List making almost always leads to surprises. We find ourselves remembering a scene or recognizing a problem or identifying a hope that hadn't occurred to us until that moment. Writing down one sentence or phrase, or sometimes even a single word, opens a door and invites what's been held just below the boundaries of consciousness to come forward. Those surprises are key learning moments. We learn a little more about ourselves, our values, the changes that are occurring in this season of life. We also recognize fluctuations of feeling as we add things to the list that make us aware of desires, inhibitions, anxieties, currents of restlessness, and curiosities we hadn't noticed before. Lists are a way of listening. As we add lines to a list, we become aware of the voice in us that speaks when we listen. This is an experience I often have in prayer or meditation. A sentence or a phrase comes from somewhere other than my busy ego mind. I experience it as a gift received. Poets and people who work in other creative arts often speak of how a line or an image or an idea just came to me in the course of painting or writing or sculpting. In order for that to happen, a person has to remain open to the new and the unplanned, even in the midst of a project, something that can be difficult for very goal-oriented people. But even for the more driven, a list can be a simple way of pausing and allowing, making space for more when the mind might begin to close or clutch at a single plan too soon. It's a reminder that there's always more to see or to listen for. It slows the scampering mind and tempers argument with imagination. Inevitably, a line or two on a lengthening list will resonate with possibility. Those lines may surprise and summon us to approaches we hadn't imagined before. Something in the momentum of list-making opens corners of the mind that can be hard to reach and gives the inner voice a say. Lists are a way of loving. Paying attention is the first step toward love. We can love only what we notice, name, return to, and reflect on. Listing is a way of calling to our own attention those things that might have lingered at the margins of our awareness, giving them a place as we reorder our priorities. As I made the list, When to Call Home, Part 3, I added, as they occurred to me, lines like, when it's too early to call anyone else, and when you wish to be celebrated, and when you need a reality check, and realized with renewed gratitude and a rush of affection how much I loved the people at home who would answer that call. If I list what I love about my daughter, dimensions of her life I rarely pause to consider become more apparent, and the mystery of her own otherness renews my awareness that even those we think we know best are complex, mysterious beings put into our lives for purposes we can't fully fathom, and finally known only to God. Many of the poems I've written for my husband began as lists. What occurred to me this Valentine's Day was to thank him for the way he brings color into my life through his paintings, in the flowers he chooses for the garden, in his bright shirts and the wild dragons he draws with our grandson. Considering all that color gave me one more way to appreciate the gift that he is. Lists are a way of letting go. When oppressive memories and nagging fears or anxieties keep our throats tight, our stomachs aching, or our muscles clenched, a list can be a helpful instrument of release. As we put down and look at what we've held on to a little too tightly for a little too long, whether it's inscribed on paper or glowing on a screen where the delete button lies ready at hand, we may find that we've already allowed ourselves to let go a little. We may find that what looms and threatens may not be quite so unmanageable as we thought. To identify what we feel as specifically as possible when someone we find difficult or threatening enters the room can help us prepare and protect ourselves as we strive to keep and make peace. That's what a list can do. It can also name what we miss in a season of loss. It can become a ritual of release as we pause over each cherished aspect of a beloved person who is gone, or over each familiar place in a home that we've left. We allow ourselves to feel the ache, but also put to rest what needs to be given back to time and memory and God, so that we can continue our journeys a little freer of the undertow that impedes our ability to dwell fully in the present. lists may become a prayer practice. I didn't grow up praying the rosary or the long litanies that some churches still recite on solemn or festive occasions. Indeed, my father was of the generation of Christians who held hard to biblical warnings against vain repetition. It wasn't until I reached early adulthood and sat among people who patiently spoke a repeated refrain, "Have mercy on us," or "Pray for us," or "Graciously hear us," that I experienced the way of a litany, which balances changing focus with grounding repetition, can gentle the mind into a deep place of meditation, and soften the heart into receptivity. To write out our specific petitions followed by a refrain, or to write down the names of those we invoke to help us, can add a valuable dimension to our practice of the presence of God. To list our longings or the causes of our anguish or reasons to rejoice can clarify and enhance the conversations we have with the Spirit and the self, and shine new light on paths that sometimes take us through the shadows. These are just a few of the many purposes that list-making can serve. The following pages are an invitation to explore these purposes further. Each section offers prompts for those who want to play with the many possibilities open to the interested list maker. As you move from one section to the next, I hope that you'll be induced to take the invitation personally, and that now and then you'll be led to put this book down long enough to add lines to your own lengthening lists. In Part 1, I provide a series of reflections on the purposes and pleasures of list-making. Here, we'll consider how list-making can become not only a useful habit, but a means of growth, even a kind of spiritual discipline. Once you give a list some space in a notebook and some time in your day, new shoots of awareness and buds of ideas begin to appear. And your purposes may change over time. What began as a simple enumeration of tasks may lead to an inventory of distractions from which you'd like to free yourself. What began as a list of annoyances may become an agenda for a much-needed and long-postponed conversation. What began as an exercise in gratitude may grow into a prayer. In Part 2, I offer more specific reflections on particular life situations in which lists may become instruments of illumination or direction or discernment. While list-making requires no particular occasion, certain occasions lend themselves to the practice. Celebrations, losses, new loves, campaigns, relocations, beginnings, and farewells. All these deserve the long pause that allows for articulation. Holiday rituals and life transitions can easily fall into cliché, but can be revived and renewed by the simple practice of speaking the small truths that animate the abstractions. It's sweet to hear "I love you" on Valentine's Day, but the message can become even more meaningful when it's accompanied by a list of "things I love about you," or "moments that have made me fall in love with you again." At Thanksgiving, it's good to go around the table and let each person in turn offer one thing he or she is thankful for. But one year it might be refreshing and revealing to vary the ritual by having everyone put together a list of ways I like to be thanked. In Part 3, I offer a number of my lists written on a variety of occasions, along with stories about how they grew. My hope is that in reading through my lists, you'll feel encouraged to make your own, to tinker with them, to let them grow up to be poems or essays or love letters or blog posts. I have found over time that lines from my lists remain in my memory as reminders or benchmarks or signposts. Some have ended up on my wall. Some have become birthday cards. Some have remained on scraps of paper I come across now and then, tucked into books or the backs of drawers, and rediscovering them, like finding money in a pocket, has provided moments of unexpected satisfaction. Wherever your lists turn up, I hope they will offer occasional epiphanies, foster conversations worth having, and become gifts for you and others.